How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. How's it been? How's everything been going, especially with this quarantine situation?
Well, things are better in New York City. Um, as of now, I'm observing statistics for coronavirus, and at the height of the epidemic in New York City, we had over 6,000 cases, new cases a day. Now
Wow.
I'm seeing. It depends on the day, but I've seen in the last few days like 50 cases a day.
So that's a significant drop. Significant drop.
Yeah, so I think I'm feeling a lot better about it.
I hear you. I hear you. Well, the idea from the beginning was, excuse me, for them to so-called flatten the curve, and I think they pretty much destroyed the curve, right? From 6,000 cases a day down to 50 cases. That's a huge drop. Um, so, I mean, for all intents and purposes, if we look at it from the perspective of are we doing well, are we doing better? I think we're doing better, but the quarantine still carries on.
Well, yeah, they do it in phases. They're allowing some reopening very cautiously, and I understand where they're coming from. It's
Yeah,
an unknown disease. We don't know how it's going to jump back, and with phase two. So
yeah. That's if we do have a phase two, and for whatever reason they're predicting that that's like a certainty. And then of course, you have a lot going on right now on top of this coronavirus situation that would potentially expose people. For instance, there's the George Floyd situation, which has, I mean, literally thousands of people out protesting, um, gathering. So we have sort of like this duality thing where people have this potential exposure to coronavirus, and at the same time, they are going out to protest. So the George Floyd situation, it's a huge issue right now, bringing thousands of people out into the streets. So you want to go briefly over what that was or what it is?
well, yeah, sure. What we know, and I'm not going to talk about the emotional reaction of the crowd right now,
No,
because that's uh, to me that has nothing to do with the facts. So if we go over the facts, what we know is that we have a police officer who exceeded his, uh, well, we should say, provided excessive force, and while doing the arrest, and that caused the the person being arrested to die. Now
George
we also
Floyd.
George Floyd is the person who died. We also know that the officer wasn't alone. There were three other officers with him. The officer who was doing the arresting happens to be white, and the person being arrested happens to be black. Now, there were other people with him. There was a Chinese guy. I believe there was another black guy. Um, and I think I'm not 100% sure that there was another black guy, but looking at the pictures, looks to me like he was. We also know that George Floyd was saying that he couldn't breathe, and the officer still pursued with with the knee on his neck, and prevented him from breathing supposedly, and he died. Now, to me, there is indisputable evidence that it's, you could say, police brutality for sure. It's he exceeded the force that needed to be put with this arrest. The He wasn't a violent criminal. Well, that is not shown on the video. I assume he was not, because he was arrested for he was the suspect for passing a forged uh, forged currency. What is happening is everyone is saying, hey, this is clearly, you have Black Lives Matter, you have protesters saying this is racism. Now, to me, that's only based on the fact that the suspect was black and the arresting officer was white. To me, that is not sufficient evidence to say that this was racism. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, I can see your point that if you isolated the situation where there's a white police officer and a black suspect, and force was applied, he pressed his knee to his neck, and caused this person's death. I could see if you took this in isolation, you could make the argument that maybe it was not, maybe it wasn't racism. Maybe it was some officer who was caught up in a moment. Who knows what was going on in his mind? There is video, and just based on most people's observation, he just sort of exhibited like a callous regard for the, I'm going to say, the life of the person, but more so than that, the person's cries for or pleas for, I I don't want to say help, but I guess the, you know,
To let him breathe, basically, yeah.
yeah, exactly, yeah, or to let up off of him, and he just displayed no feeling at all, to the extent that the person literally died. George Floyd died. The net result was his death. So again, if you look at this in isolation, you could say, well, he was overzealous. Maybe he was caught up in a moment. We don't know. We literally don't know what was in the mind of the officer. We just don't know. But what people are doing, and what I guess the focus or the thrust of these protests, right? The focus of the protests, and one of the reasons they're calling it racism is because they're looking at what are known as patterns and practices, more so than an isolated incident. So with an isolated incident, we have no idea what this personal circumstances were. We could guess, we could try to figure out based on maybe the officer's prior history, but ultimately we don't know. But when you look at the patterns, in particular that city, let's just focus on that city. I mean, you could broaden it to a nationwide thing. But if you just look at the patterns that have occurred in that city. So first thing they do is they look at statistics. They look at, based on population and police practices, what is the population of the black community versus the white community? And let's look at the numbers in terms of arrests and or stops. And let's look at the number of stops that have resulted in some sort of either crime or conviction. And so what they've determined is that the numbers in terms of population, the black community is significantly smaller than the white community in that city and in that state. However, when you look at the numbers of blacks that have been stopped or arrested, the numbers far outweigh what those are happening, I guess, in the white community. So that's the first thing. So the second thing is how many of those stops result in convictions. And so they determine that even though they're stopped in higher proportions, numbers of those stops don't result in convictions. So, so they look at that. They say, well, all these people are being stopped, but there are no convictions associated with the stops. So you could say one or two things. You could say, well, the black community in that city, the reason more of them are being stopped is because more of them do crimes. I mean, that's debatable, right? It's debatable, and also, someone could give us like an answer. They could say, well, no, that's just not true. And apparently this is what they're finding, that the reasons they're being stopped is not because they're more likely to be involved in crimes. So then you have to ask another question. Well, if that's not the case, then why is it that more black citizens are being stopped and put through the legal
Well,
system? You have to ask that
I
question. Yeah, go ahead. I'm
I
sorry.
I understand where you're going. You're talking about the general attitude. You're not talking about arrests per se or death by arrests. You're talking about the general
The
uh,
interactions between the police
interaction
and,
in the police. Right,
yeah,
right, and
whether they
in the black
result in,
community. Right.
yeah, right,
Okay.
whether they result in arrests or
I see.
deaths or whatever, like
Yeah.
just the number of interactions.
Hmm. Okay.
And
Well,
yeah,
the uh, the- I think we have to distinguish between harassment by police and police brutality. They're different things. If you're protesting police harassment, that's one thing. If you're protesting police brutality, you should say, well, I protest police brutality, or Black Lives Matter. So that means, clearly to me, that means police brutality and death. So that's what we see in the protests. However, if you look at the FBI statistics, it says that crime statistics. It says that for 10,000 cases of arrests of black people, you have 3 deaths. Now, for each 10,000 arrests of white people, you have 4 deaths. So if you look nationwide, I don't see evidence of any prejudice.
well,
Or yeah,
yeah, well, okay, I get you. So if you took the numbers just based on face value, right? So 3 or 4 white deaths versus 3 black deaths, but you still have to look at population. So blacks as a proportion of the population, they only make up like, what is it, 12, 13% of the population. That's
yeah,
it.
right.
Whereas, I mean, 13%. So when you put those numbers side by side, right? So let's just say I have um, the 10, to put in real number terms, right? If I have 10 black people and let's just say 100 white people, right? And out of that group of 10, 4 of those people are killed. And out of that group, no, 3, right? And out of that group of white people, 4 are killed. So in terms of the population, the numbers of people killed are higher, like significantly higher. That means that of those 10 people, right? 4 people, what is that? It's like 40%. If you take I'm sorry, 3 people, that's 30%. If you take the 4 people out of the 100, well, that's only like 4%,
Well,
right?
I think your argument would only work if you compare. I mean, yeah, percentage-wise, you would have a bigger percent. I get what you're saying.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
get a
yeah.
bigger
And,
percent.
and
But to say that, let's say, for every 10,000 arrests of a white person, you have 4 deaths, then for black people, because their percentage is population is smaller,
right,
and
right.
then you should have like maybe, I don't know, point one of a percent
If you
death
were,
rate.
if right,
That's
if you were yes, yes, yes,
Yeah, but
absolutely.
that's to me it still doesn't make statistical sense. To me, 10,000 people, whether they're white or black, are still 10,000 people. So I think that I disagree with that argument. I think that absolute number is the one that should be considered.
I'm not sure because look, um, if the population is smaller, significantly smaller, right? You have to look at it this way. If there are 10 black people in a room and you kill four of them, that means you kill 40% of the population. I'm gonna say you, meaning like anybody, if they just die,
Right. Correct.
40% of that population is gone. Whereas
Correct.
like for the white population, if you kill four people, you've only killed 4% of the population, only 4%. So that's why, when you look at it from a statistical standpoint, more of the black population is being affected by
That
this
I agree with. I
than the
agree
white
with that.
population.
I agree with the statement that more is being affected percentage-wise. Yes, I agree. Well,
Right,
my
statistically.
point is yes, but my point is that there is no evidence of prejudice in the arrest resulting in death.
Well, here's how the presumptions are made, right? And again, you can't say that. Like I wouldn't say, definitively that this is racism. But again, what you do is you look at things from a proportional standpoint. And if, for example, you were to talk to the people on the ground, right, those people, they would question it, would say, well, why is it that we're such a small percentage of the population, and yet we represent such a huge percent of the population who are being killed? Right? I mean, you can make a bunch of assumptions. You could, again, like I said before, you could say, well, you guys are involved in that much more crime, criminal activity. But then you could say, well, when, we are taken in to custody, it's determined that we didn't do anything. And so those cases are dismissed.
Okay,
And that is the truth, though.
let me take the argument in another direction.
Okay.
Black Lives Matter. So there is an organization that says that Black Lives Matter, however you want to interpret that. To me, they're saying that they're trying to save the lives of black people. Do you agree with that?
I would agree. Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. So if that is their cause, how come like the last uh, in the last several weekends, just the weekends, like in the city of Chicago, in black on black violence, there were like 30 deaths. Sorry, 30 shootings, not deaths. 30 shootings, 50 shootings in just one weekend of black people. Yet, Black Lives Matter is silent about it. Why? Because it's black on black. So, so to them, Black lives only matter when the perpetrator is not black. So to me, it's not it just doesn't make sense. What do
Well,
you think?
okay. So I've heard that argument. And so a couple of things are going on. The first thing is that we have a media that underreports the um, the number of different organizations that exist in the black community that um, are like their focus is to mitigate the amount of black on black crime, supposedly black on black crime, right? Um, but you just don't hear about them. There are organizations all over the place, and um, that work in the community to prevent this. The thing is, though, that maybe you haven't heard of them, and and it makes sense that you haven't because they don't report that. Um, the second thing is, um, let's just say that those organizations didn't exist, right? So then the second thing would be like, here's the rhetorical question. So if a black person kills another black person, um, does that make it okay now? Because they're saying, all right, well, you guys kill each other. So what difference does it make if we kill you? right? You killing each other. Is that, and it's a rhetorical question, right? Um, does that make it okay for
Well,
the other outside group to come in and kill these people because, hey, you killing each other anyway? And the reason I'm stressing that is rhetorical because no one would really ask a question like that. But that's the implied thing when someone says, well, um, there's this, situation in the black community. That's one thing. But now let's look at another one because I know you want to interject.
no,
Um,
go ahead.
the other thing is that when you study crime and this psychology, the sociology behind criminality and crime, in the majority of crime that is perpetrated between people who are alike. So black people commit crimes against black people, white people commit crimes against white people. That's just the way crime works, right? I don't know why. I mean, I'm not a sociologist. I couldn't tell you why. But when I do read the statistics or studies, this is what they say. Criminality and crime happens amongst people who are known to one another. So but when you look at that argument, assumption is that it only matters when blacks perpetrate crimes against blacks. We don't look at, crimes that are whites perpetrated against whites. But that happens all the time, right? So it's one thing to say, well, blacks commit crimes against blacks, and so that is the nature of crime. People commit crimes against their own groups way, way, way more than they commit not, crimes against either intergroup crimes, right? Um, it just doesn't happen as much. Yep. So you have a couple of things. One is that people don't talk about the black organizations that are working within the communities, to prevent this sort of thing.
Yeah.
People don't necessarily talk about the reasons why there's a lot of intergroup criminality on in black communities and white, which we could talk about briefly, like poverty. There's poverty in black communities. There's poverty in white communities. Just to go off the grid a little bit, one of the issues and is that the social um, situations that the poverty and everything that happens in white communities, that's underreported too. Because if you were a foreigner or someone in another country looking at America and the social system, you would think that most white people are doing okay, right? Like the reality is way, way, way different than that. And that's and there's a book, right? And I'll just mention it's called Hillbilly Elegy. I might have mentioned it to you once, where there's a white guy, he's from Appalachia, and he talks about like, all of the different social ills that happen in white communities and in the white community in that particular area that nobody talks about. It's almost as if they don't want that to exist.